my name is Greg Shaffer, and I'm a professor at the University of California, Irvine School of Law. And my area is on international law and the interaction between international law and international politics and economy, and its relationship to the nation state and local governance. I work a lot in trade issues and the international economy, and I work a lot in the role of the implications of international institutions, international treaties in developing countries, and their ability to participate in the shaping of these very international institutions that affect them. So I've been asked to be one of the authors of a Chapter 11, and the chapter is on global policy and supranational organizations. And we are at an early stage in terms of writing or dividing up responsibility for the chapter. But right now I've been assigned to work on the area on accountability mechanisms and international law, courts, and the rule of law, which are large topics in themselves. And I'm working with a Chilean law professor on constitutional law in Chile named Javier Cuso. One of the things that we'll be talking about is, in my view, the challenge. On the one hand, we have global problems and transnational problems, from climate change to health issues to the global economy to finance to capital flows and currency manipulation and so forth. And we need international and supranational institutions. But on the other hand, only a few people in the world actually can participate and shape what comes out of those international institutions, which can have large implications, normative implications, in terms of setting the laws which then are implemented around the world, and raises basic questions of accountability and legitimacy. But at the same time, my concern would be that it'd be easy to critique any international institution as being unaccountable or illegitimate. But if we do that, the alternative is a world without any order whatsoever. So we need to think international institutions in some ways are created to hold states accountable towards their citizens, towards creating human rights, towards citizens outside of their own national governance. But we have this challenge, and it's not going to be an easy challenge to solve, which is how can those who don't have the same resources, be they states, or be they civil society organizations, or be they individuals, how are their voices heard directly, indirectly in these norm setters? And so one of my areas has been looking at what I call transnational legal ordering and the creation of transnational legal orders. Because on the one hand, global institutions, although they can set global norms, they're relatively weak in terms of their enforcement powers, especially vis-a-vis more powerful players. And so they depend on nation states, and they depend ultimately on implementation and acceptance of the norms that they're prescribing, be they women's rights, be they bankruptcy technical norms, be they trade norms, customs norms, and so forth. And so I'm very interested in the interaction of where do these norms come from. Many times they come from powerful players. Could be the United States, it could be particular individuals or financial organizations and so forth. And so looking at where the flow of legal norms from the local to the global to the local, and that interaction over time, that's what I study empirically, and then pragmatically trying to understand, well, how can we improve these processes? Certainly in my area, it was the global economy. And as we know today, looking every day, we go onto the web to see how are things shaping up today, and especially with the global economy has seen major shifts within the last 10 years with the rise of China and the rise of developing countries, which have now constitute, over the last 10, 12 years, 10% more of the global economy than they did a decade ago, which means a relative loss of economic clout of the United States and Europe. So how do we govern a globe where before you had a relative hegemony in terms of just economic clout of the United States and Europe working together, in a much more sort of diverse type of world. But the global economy links to so many different issues, right? So it clearly links to environmental policy, climate change. It links to concerns about income distribution, the social welfare state, and so forth. So how do we create governance structures for the global economy, for finance, for trade? And so forth. And then with the rise of developing countries, it's become, in some ways, you can see this as an improvement in terms of participation, but you see a great deal of resistance from the existing powers. And so how are they integrated? Can we create coherent norms with respect to these types of issues? And it's on the pages today, and law plays a role. And in some ways, we should see that there's huge successes, right? There's clearly challenges with respect to the World Trade Organization, which I've written about in terms of participation. But at the same time, I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that it's quite remarkable that countries such as China, Russia, the United States, and Europe, when they have conflicts, they address them through law. And they delegate the issue to an international court to issue a ruling based on an agreement they signed. It's no other area of international relations does China, Russia, United States, and Europe resolve their problems through law and through a third-party institution. It's fragile. We'll see if this can last. But that is a sign of a development. If you compare where we were in the Great Recession in the 1930s and the trade conflicts and economic warfare of trying to export your own problems to other countries, your own unemployment to other countries, it's a great development that we've seen. And the challenge will be now, how can we integrate issues so that it's not simply an institution in which economic concerns trump other social and environmental concerns. And I've certainly been working in this particular area, and I think we've seen some progress. And also, how can we integrate the development concerns of countries who one straight size does not necessarily fit all, and putting a straitjacket on their development policies is a real challenge. And so there's been a number of economists and lawyers who have been trying to work within the existing rules through interpreting the existing rules to provide for development space, and at the same time, where the rules need pressure to try to change the rules, creating arguments and enhancing, working with people in those countries to put those issues on the agenda. Top-down prescriptions, where you just simply create global norms and global institutions, they generally are going to fail unless they engage with those who are affected at the local level. And so actually engaging with people at the national and local level, I think, is a great challenge. And that's what I've worked a lot on capacity building in developing countries on trade. I've written with authors from India, from Brazil, and China to explore different mechanisms. And I think that the other aspect of this is that we should, when we look at these states, many of them have been relatively closed states where the bureaucracy has not been open to those who are affected by its policy. And so finding ways that it opens itself up and becomes more transparent, and in turn becomes more accountable. So accountability is at multiple levels. It's both at the international institution, but it's also at the national level. And so I think those are some of the great challenges that we need to see of making national governments who, quote, represent their citizens at the international level much more transparent, creating parallel groups and creating the international institutions more transparent so groups outside the government can directly follow them and use new technologies and so forth to organize and promote their own particular perspectives and views. I think that's central, and I think we're seeing some possibility for development. I think the risks and we see also at the same time a fragmentation of policy. We see this in the United States in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which is being negotiated now, which excludes China. And there's a risk where it's actually, we go back in history and we can see how Japan was isolated right before World War II. And there are all sorts of trade discriminatory mechanisms against Japan. And we need to figure out a way that this is a potentially dangerous, this sort of move towards minilateralism. One can see if global institutions are blocked, why this is taking place. But if it creates new forms of blocks, trade blocks, discrimination against countries such as China, it's a potential real risk that I think we need, is a major challenge that we need to be aware of. Yeah. And try to enhance, not abandon multilateral institutions, because it'd be a much worse world if we were to do so. I think the major social change is actually linked to everything, but it's not directly with respect to trade and investment and finance, but it's certainly linked to it, which is climate change. And if we don't somehow work to get, it's something that we can't address apart. We certainly can try, but ultimately we need to develop global norms and global institutions in combination with transnational and local initiatives. And this is going to be, and certainly this needs to be accommodated in a trade organization, which I've read about. I think it can be. In order, there should be a possibility of actual trade sanctions for those who are not complying with basic climate change norms, provided they're applied in a non-discriminatory manner, preferably with some sort of third-party neutral institution which can assess how they're being applied. That's central, and I think it's the major change and the major global risk that we're facing today.